Hey everyone, and welcome to the Deep Dive. You know how this goes. We're taking your source material. Today it's The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Feck. And we are diving right in, trying to pull out all those golden nuggets of knowledge.
Sounds good to me.
And to help us out today, we have with us,
I can introduce myself.
oh yeah,
I'm guest expert's name.
great to have you with us.
Glad to be here.
Okay, so The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Feck by Mark Manson. So to give everybody a little bit of background, we're working from a summary of this book by James Clear, and then we also have some YouTube videos we found. But we're going to jump right in because it's not about being an uncaring robot rat.
Right, yeah, no.
We're not saying just don't care about anything.
No, not at all.
This is about being intentional. So what were your initial thoughts? What jumped out at you?
Well, I think the thing that really resonated with me the most was this idea that suffering is inevitable. And it's not about achieving some problem-free existence, but instead deciding what problems you want to have.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah.
Choosing your problems.
Choosing your problems, yeah. Because we all have them, right?
We do. That whole thing about the feedback loop from hell,
Yeah.
where you're constantly in this loop of, I want to be happy, but then you're so focused on not being happy that it's like, oh my gosh, I can't get out of this.
Yeah, exactly. Like how many of us are walking around wishing things were different?
Oh my gosh, probably all of us,
Yeah,
right?
yeah. And so to kind of shift your perspective and say, okay, there are always going to be challenges, but what challenges am I willing to sign up for that are actually in line with my values?
Right, so let's unpack that a little bit. Because we're not saying that everybody should just accept misery and suffering.
No.
But if you're working towards something you're passionate about, there's going to be some inherent challenges in that.
Yeah, for sure. It's about finding meaning in the struggle, right? Like if you want to be a musician, you're signing up for long nights, harsh critiques, maybe you're not making a lot of money. But if that's what you're passionate about, those problems, in a way, are kind of just stepping stones. They're not roadblocks.
Right, it's about reframing your relationship maybe with the struggle.
Exactly.
Because the struggle is part of it. Failure is part of it. But he talks about that too. He's like, failure is not fatal.
It's feedback, right?
With feedbacks.
Every time you stumble, you learn something. So in a way, somebody who's failed a lot has experimented more than somebody who's too afraid to even try.
That is such a good point. And I was thinking about that as I was reading, because James Clear had this great quote in his summary. He said, the more you've failed, the more you've likely experimented.
Right.
And that puts you closer to success.
Yeah. And it's like those facts that we learn as kids that we think they're true, and then they're not.
Okay, give us an example.
It's like we were taught that different parts of our tongue taste different things.
Oh, right, yeah.
But it turns out that's completely not true at all.
Yeah.
But that's how we thought the world worked for however many years.
Yeah.
And it's like we learn and we adapt. And it's the same with like your goals. Just because something didn't work out the way you wanted it to, it doesn't mean that you are a failure.
And speaking of things that don't always go the way we want them to, and this is something I think we can all relate to, comparison.
Yes. Especially in the age of social media.
Ugh, tell me about it. It's so easy to get caught in that trap of comparing yourself to others. Like Manson makes a really good point where he says it's kind of pointless to compare yourself to other people.
It is. It so is.
Because we've all had different journeys.
Completely different journeys. And we're all at different points in our journey.
And we only see a very small sliver
Exactly.
of other people's journeys.
Right. We're comparing like our entire lives to somebody's highlight reel.
Exactly. Like a single Instagram post.
Yeah.
And even then, who knows what's really going on behind that picture?
Exactly. And that was something I really struggled with. And I think the book helped me kind of unpack that a little bit. I would scroll through social media and like be like, oh, everyone's got it figured out but me, you know?
Oh, 100%. Like I'll see someone's vacation photos and it's like, oh,
Yeah.
my life is terrible. But I have no idea,
Exactly.
what's going on behind the scenes.
Yeah. And you're comparing your messy behind the scenes to somebody's like curated, perfect outward appearance.
Yeah. How do we stop doing that?
Well, I think for me, it was awareness, Like as soon as you start to feel yourself comparing yourself to someone else, just gently redirect.
That's great advice. And this all kind of ties into, I think, like the big takeaway from this book, which is really about understanding and identifying your values. Because he doesn't just say, don't give a feck, right?
Right. He gives you a framework to work with.
He gives you a framework. And so how do we do that? How do we identify, like, what are my values?
Yeah. Well, I really liked how he breaks it down between good values and bad values.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So tell us a little bit more about that. Like, what constitutes a good value versus a bad value?
So good values tend to be more internally driven, so they're coming from within you, as opposed to like societal expectations or anything like that. They're more about the journey rather than the destination, and they usually contribute to something bigger than yourself. Whereas bad values tend to be a little more externally driven,
Yeah.
things that are outside of your control, and they tend to lead to a lot of suffering.
So give us an example. Like, what would be an example of, a bad value versus a good value?
So let's say you're constantly chasing validation from others.
Yeah.
That would be an example of like a bad value because it's externally driven. Like your self-worth is dependent on how other people see you, and that can lead to like a lot of anxiety and insecurity.
100%.
But like a good value in that same vein could be something like self-compassion. Where you're treating yourself with kindness and understanding regardless of what other people are saying.
Right. So it's more about how you view yourself rather than how you think others view you.
Exactly. And that's really empowering, actually, when you start to kind of shift your perspective on that.
Yeah. And, this all ties back to being intentional with our energy, which I think is so, so crucial, especially in today's world.
Absolutely, because we only have so much energy each day.
We do. We have a limited amount, and we're not taught that.
Yeah. No, we're not. And I love how he talks about the do something principle
Yes. Love that.
because it's so easy to get caught up in that, like, oh, I'll wait till I feel motivated and then I'll do the thing.
Yes.
But he's like, no, it's the opposite.
It's the opposite. I'm telling you, this is my life.
Yeah.
It's like the amount of times where I'm like, oh, this is going to be so terrible. And then I actually start doing the thing, and I'm like, this isn't bad at all.
Yeah. No,
And
it's never as bad as you think it's going to be in your head.
never. And that's, I think, why procrastination is such a big problem for so many people.
Oh, yeah.
It's like we build this up in our minds, this thing that we're dreading. But often when we actually just take that first step,
Exactly.
it's not that bad.
Yeah, it's like that saying, the journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step.
A single step. So for our listeners out there who are like, okay, I'm feeling stuck. What's something I can do right now? What would be a good first step, like a small action step that somebody could take just to kind of get that momentum going?
Well, I think just based on, kind of what we were just saying, like, what is something that you've been putting off because you're waiting to feel motivated for it?
Yes.
And it could be sending an email, it could be cleaning your room, could be starting that creative project you've always wanted to start.
Of that.
Whatever it is, commit to 5 minutes today. Just 5 minutes.
5 minutes.
And see what happens. And you might be surprised at how much you actually accomplish in that 5 minutes. And you might even feel a little more motivated to keep going.
I love that. I love that challenge. And, speaking of kind of challenging ourselves and getting a little uncomfortable, Manson talks about some pretty, deep topics
Yeah.
in this book. Like, he doesn't shy away from death.
No, he doesn't. But not in like a morbid way.
Right. And I think that's important to mention.
Yeah, it's not about being like obsessed with death.
It's more about using it as a lens
Exactly.
to help us figure out what's important.
Yeah.
Right. Because especially in the last few years, it's like we have been reminded
Yeah.
that life is short. And it's like, what am I doing with this
Yeah.
one precious life? What's
Hey,
important?
what are my values, really?
Exactly. And so are we living in alignment with those values?
Yeah. And are we giving our energy to the things that we actually care about?
Exactly. And that's what I love about this book is it's not about like being indifferent. It's really not.
It's about deciding what you're going to give a feck about.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Like if you only had a limited number of frecks to give,
Yeah.
what would you spend them on?
Right. What are you going to hoard? What are you going to get rid of?
Oh, what a great question. It's about being intentional with our energy, with our thoughts, with our actions, and ultimately like creating a more meaningful and fulfilling life
Yeah.
on your own terms.
Exactly. Yeah.
And I think that's something we all want, right? Even if we don't know what that looks like yet.
For sure.
And I think that's what's so cool about this book is it really gives
They
you,
give you the tools.
it gives you the tools, the framework.
The questions to ask yourself. Yeah, it doesn't tell you what to do.
It doesn't tell you what to think.
Right.
It helps you figure out
Yeah,
what you should be thinking about.
totally.
Oh my gosh, this was such a good conversation. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. This was a lot of fun.
And for our listeners, if you are looking for a book that's going to, challenge you, maybe make you laugh a little bit, it's a little irreverent, but really help you live a more intentional life, we highly recommend checking out The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Feck. And we want to hear from you. Before you go, what is one thing that you're going to stop giving a feck about starting today? Let us know. Until next time, happy diving.